Welcome to the play-in knockout stage here at MSI 2019, where home favorites Phong Vu Buffalo gear up for our first best-of-5 series against Team Liquid. Hello, everyone, and welcome to MSI CountDown, where we break down key picks, look at players to watch, and give the rundown on the first international event of 2019 until the timer reaches 0, and we jump into Champions Select. These two have been hard at it here over the past week.
Don't tell him. I've been in the office every day.
I've seen him in the office.
He doesn't know this is also my premiere as well. But
look, Mark has to think a lot, all right, for his
the moral support. Very, very clear here.
I gotta be here for my guy. All right, MSI 2019 is well underway as we saw Phong Vu Buffalo and Vega Squadron advance from the play-in group stage just this last week.
Yeah, Vega Squadron dominated Group B, absolutely blowing them out of the water. Only loss was after they already kind of secured their position and doing it with a lot of interesting picks.
Yeah, and I'm going to say it's not a controversial opinion to say that Group A was the more stacked group.
Yes.
It felt like there were a lot of fan favorites in that group, but eventually it was Phong Vu Buffalo's much faster paced games in Group A, whereas Group B was kind of really decided about these very creative picks and compositions.
From here, we move forward to the knockout stage, and in the knockout stage, we'll have 3 best-of-5 series, with the winners joining Invictus Gaming, SKT, and G2 Esports in the group stage. The losers of today's matches will face off tomorrow for that 6th and final spot.
Which means we will have at least one of these emerging regions teams advancing because, 3 spots, 4 teams, do the math.
Boom. We can do that. I can do that math here on air right now. Today's second series has Vega Squadron looking to continue their solid play going into the knockout stage.
And Vega Squadron, I think they kind of surprised a lot of people. When you look at Group B, no one was really quite sure who was going to inch that one out, but they were just definitively head and shoulders better than the rest of the competition, only dropping a single game.
And it was impressive, too, because it was the squad's first Riot International tournament that they've attended, as well as the fact that 4 of them have never played internationally before, Santos being the only guy who's been on that stage. And so to come out and dominate a group in such a way, it's very impressive for so many new players.
Right, as you mentioned, undefeated going into that final game, but having already locked their spot for the knockout stage. Vega is new to the international stage. Flash Wolves, though, on the other hand, their opponent, they've been here before. They're a mainstay at MSI and Worlds over the past few years, and in addition to their dominance on home soil.
Yeah, Flash Wolves, people recognize the name a lot, but you need to recognize that this is a pretty different roster, all things considered. They have such a long history that you just kind of assume it's the same team time and time again. You see them at Worlds Quarters 2015, all these group stage events, all these MSIs, semifinals even, so you know that they have this long history of international success.
And it just speaks to kind of the premier organization from the LMS, the fact that they can keep changing the recipe, but they still are delivering when it counts. So making MSI repeatedly, this is one of the international events that the Flash Wolves tend to do very well at versus something like World. So I have good expectations for Flash Wolves.
But we talk about the history of the Flash Wolves. The cornerstones of their success over these past years are no longer with the lineup. You have Hanabi and Betty, the only returning members from last year's MSI lineup.
And so the key thing is you've lost people like Karsa, you've lost Maple, you've lost Sword Art. So you just have these two, your AD carry and your top laner, to play around. And that fundamentally changes how the Flash Wolves are now approaching the game. They are much more about their side lanes. Hanabi, because he is naturally a carry-oriented top laner, it feels like the team is slightly skewed that way, but Betty is just so damn consistent.
And that's what's really impressive, is that they have been able to kind of deal with that turnover. They were tested a lot more this year, it feels like, in the LMS. They did have a really hard-fought 5-game series in their semifinals, but they did come out on top. They even had to swap their junglers, which they brought both here, so you might see even some of that come through. They didn't use them very often, so probably not going to be the case, but this is a roster that has had to adapt despite how similar the name is.
And it'll be great to get a look at them finally on the international stage here after those number of changes. Of course, that series will follow shortly after our first matchup, so make sure you stay tuned for that. And if you're wondering why on earth Nautilus is being played in the mid lane, we'll dive deeper into that after the break, along with other key picks. So don't touch that browser. Welcome back to the MSI Countdown, where we're making our way towards Champion Select ahead of our first series of the day. Team Liquid versus Fong Vu Buffalo. To help us break down the MSI meta so far, though, we're going to send it over to a completely original, never-before-seen segment by none other than Mark Zimmerman.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Mark Z's picks to keep an eye on because they've recently been buffed or nerfed, which makes them viable in pro. Are they viable in pro? Some people have already played these, so probably. We'll find out. Let's jump right into it. This week, the pick is Nautilus mid. Back to you, Dash.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, no problem.
That was very insightful. So, Nautilus mid.
Yeah, watch it.
Yeah, it's a pick that we should keep our eye on.
Yeah.
How about that pick?
Picks to watch. So, Nautilus mid. The thing is, I feel like whenever you're loading in like hard CC on a champion, wave clear on a champion, the fact that he has a lot of decent matchups, that he does still have flexibility in terms of his positioning. He can be played in support. He can be played in that mid lane. It kind of just puts you over the top, which is why he's really started to make a splash, if you will, at this MSI.
Oh, God. I know the puns are going to come out of you.
I'm ready.
But he is really interesting because he did receive a couple small buffs, like his Q damage was increased, his passive root went up, he got a little bit of armor. It's one of those things that over time he just became very powerful, abuses Aftershock like a lot of strong mid laners, and has good matchups into a lot of the melee or immobile mid laners.
I think what's really interesting is how his priority will change. Like right now at MSI, we do see him crop up, but he's not like 100% pick or ban, like first priority snap lock.
But could he get there?
Maybe if someone comes onto the stage and just starts slamming with him.
Yeah, it's hard to say because it feels like some of the more traditional, longer range DPS mages can probably deal with him just fine if they can stay out of some of his hook range.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Of course, one thing that we have seen in the past and are continuing to see here is Sona Taric in the bot lane, and it is having quite an effect on Champion Select overall.
Yeah, in the playing stage of the groups, like all throughout, you're always seeing red side Taric ban unless you're leaving it up because you want to play into it, because you know the other team's going to pick it for the most part. It's still super high presence, very good win rate, 6% here, but across the globe, everyone was playing it, and it just deals with so many things in the current meta so well.
And for me, it's really interesting that when you're drafting against it, it used to be like when Xayah and Rakan were so strong that you could at least split them up. That if you saw Rakan priority, you would just take away the Xayah. It's not the same with Sona Taric. If Taric comes in, even if you could pick it away, you're like, I guess I just give it to him. Like, I just gotta watch this happen to me. And it's about what counters that you then bring, which we've seen the likes of like a Nuke Zoe, or even trying to contest it for kill-oriented lanes by bringing out things like a Blitzcrank.
Either way, if you're gonna leave it up, you better have a plan to deal with it. Lastly, I wanna talk about Hecarim, one of the champions that seems to have found a bit of a home here at MSI in the top lane.
Yeah, and I think it's been coming, like bubbling up a little bit across different regions, and it's finally kind of hitting the main part, but it feels like more top lane than jungle, which is surprising. It does have a lot of good matchups into a lot of melee champions, the W sustain, the Q damage that can ramp up on a wave, all that's really strong. So you can see there, basically 60, 70% of the time it's in the top lane.
Yeah, and I feel like that is because of the amount of gold that you're able to get out of the lane versus something like the jungle. He still does have a very expensive build if he wants to be that carry-oriented Hecarim going for the Trinity Force, and that's why you'll usually see him up there, but he can be played in the jungle.
And especially with the Sona Taric, like a lot of people like comboing it with that because he gives you an engaged threat with the Sona Taric, because Sona Taric, for the most part, is not very strong in lane. It's more about countering what enemy comps can do. You want to poke us, we have heal. You want to engage, we have this Taric ultimate, but they need some help to start their own fights often. That's what Hecarim brings in spades.
And I think in some ways Hecarim is kind of just the tip of the iceberg of a larger conversation, which is that around top lane and top lane meta. Because there has been, in previous patches, a couple of changes to a number of tanks that, have basically been made an effort of getting tanks into the meta, but they're not quite finding their way onto the stage here at MSI. Still very top lane carry-centric so far.
I think that was kind of the big question. I think it's indicative of the players that are at this tournament, but you are correct. You had buffs going, or changes in buffs going to the likes of Shin, the likes of Ornn. You had Sejuani that was probably going to make a bigger presence. So you thought that there was going to be more of an emphasis on kind of like tanky top part of the map, but because it is still these carry champions, I don't know if that's going to shift maybe when the other teams join them, but if you have like Khan, Wonder, the Shy? Probably not.
Yeah, that's why I was like,
They're not being relegated to Arn?
Is Tanks not strong enough, or we just have such good carry players that for the most part they're playing that? That's what's interesting with the Team Liquid matchup coming up, is they probably have the most tank-focused top lane player almost remaining in the tournament.
But we even saw in the LCS playoffs alone, they were kind of pushing Impact back towards that carry meta, maybe in anticipation of exactly the matchups he'll find himself in at this tournament. Dracos and Azael, though, they'll be bringing you the first series of the day, Team Liquid versus Fongvu Buffalo. So let's get their thoughts on that matchup.
Thank you very much, Dash. Of course, very excited for the first best of 5 of MSI 2019. And it's good that you guys bring up the top lane meta discussion. So when we look at the specific players, Zeros versus Impact, what do we think is going to unfold here? Is Impact going to be the first guy to play some of these tanks?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the question on everyone's mind, right? He has traditionally been known in North America as a tank player. That being said, in the semifinals against FlyQuest, in the finals against TSM, he was on the carries. He was performing both against Viper and Broken Blade and really kind of emphasizing that style. You have to think, though, when he is going up against Zeros, who is such a star for the Fongvu Buffalo, for Vietnam, that is something that they may be looking to target. When you're in a carry versus carry matchup, hey, this can be pretty volatile. So it does give opportunities for guys like Meliodas to get up there to try to affect this 1v1, because traditionally Team Liquid like to spend most of their jungle resources down towards their bottom lane, down towards their mid lane. That's more where Smithy is spending his time focusing. So, if there is kind of that lopsided jungle proximity up to the top lane, then hey, maybe Zeros alongside Meliodas can get ahead of Impact and kind of spread that advantage elsewhere on the map.
And I like that inevitably we stop talking about the 1v1 and start talking about the 2v1, because I think you're right. It feels so telegraphed that Team Liquid will go to the bottom side of the map, and Meliodas, just tries to be everywhere. But if top can get ahead, it does feel like a decent avenue for PVB to get maybe a game in this matchup, maybe 2, maybe take it all the way to the best of 5 and potentially even close out. They have been a very strong team. I think Team Liquid are still the favorites here, but really Vietnam has a history of being a big threat in these regions. Gigabyte Marines, of course, against TSM. I don't think anyone's gonna forget that. That was intense. There were moments where it looked like the series was already decided, and we have to wonder if we'll see some of that today.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest. Team Liquid are heavy favorites on paper, right? So it's up to the Fongvu Buffalo, it's up to this Vietnamese squad to be creative in how they attack them, to try to kind of do what they are not expecting, I think, to pick up the pace and try to play a chaotic style. You know that Team Liquid wants to take it slow, wants to play a measured game, and that is really in their wheelhouse. So I think that it's going to be up to this Vietnamese squad to surprise them and really try to make something happen.
Yeah, of course, a lot to be seen in our first series of the day, but we're stepping away. But when we return, the analyst desk zeroes in on the TL versus PVB matchup. See you here for the break after that.
It's not about who you are. It's what you represent. Strategic control. Planning it all out. And executing. Unbreakable spirit. All fight and no surrender. Wild creation. Something they've never seen before. Or, when it all goes sideways, you trust only your own skill. The trials are here. And once you decide where you stand, we'll be waiting.
always do really well against other American teams, and then I just go internationally and I play really bad. It's kind of become a curse that I've been wanting to break for years and years, but never could.
虽然我们经历了许多的挫折，走了很多有天赋的选手，但我们依旧是 MLS 赛区冠军，来到了 MSI 这个舞台，这就是闪电狼的传承。
Mọi người đã từng rất ấn tượng với các đội Việt Nam. Chúng tôi có nhiều chiến thuật đặc biệt, nhưng chúng tôi chưa thực sự thành công.
Мы разгромили 3 другие команды в группе Б. Теперь у нас есть возможность бросить вызов сильнейшей команде ЛМС.
我想带领新的狼群，带着荣誉回家。
Когда-то СНГ был регионом чудес, но в этот раз нам чудо не потребуется.
Blanco's good, but I think just should be a 3-0. I don't want to sound super cocky, but I think we're just that much better than them.
Đã hơn 2 năm kể từ khi một đội Việt Nam gây ấn tượng với quốc tế. Giờ đây trên quê hương mình đã đánh đốc chúng tôi trở thành một người chiến thắng thật thụ.
Team Liquid versus Phong Vu Buffalo is right around the corner, and as we're counting down towards Game 1 in Ho Chi Minh City, only 3 teams are going to earn a spot in groups. So let's take a look at the players who may be very key to booking a spot in the top 6, starting with our LCS MVP, Core JJ.
Yeah, it's impossible not to talk about this guy, especially in the context of MSI, because last time Team Liquid was here, last year, Ole famously benching himself, having, the confidence issues, and the whole team kind of fell apart a little bit after that. They almost rallied, but now you have a world champion stepping in, a guy who's, like you said, your MVP, so much international experience, and it's hard to imagine a similar breakdown coming from him. So they want to see, all fans want to know, how is Core JJ going to lead him and Doublelift now to hopefully greater heights?
And that's the key thing for me. It's and Doublelift. The fact that TL are so much about their bot lane, that Doublelift is such a strong ADC, and now he has a very strong support next to him, just kind of takes this bot lane to a completely different level.
I mean, he's quite literally played in the highest pressure scenario in the face of professional League of Legends.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about, who he's replacing and what happened last time around at MSI for Team Liquid, that it was a confidence issue, that it was a pressure moment where they weren't able to live up to it, you're now literally bringing in one of the best suited players, in a sense, to fill that position.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it, too, is Doublelift has always felt like, I kind of had to lead the lane and things like that. With Core JJ, he is such a powerhouse in his own. It's a lot more about taking a backseat and focusing on his individual play. Doublelift was already having slightly better international performances last year than we were kind of used to seeing out of him. And so now it's like, all right, is he really going to finally break into complete international success? Because they have not made it out of a group stage for Team Liquid in MSI or at Worlds.
True enough. There still is a lot of pressure riding on this entire squad. Let's jump to the flip side of that first matchup of the day. Meliodas is our pick to watch here for the Phong Vu Buffalo.
If you guys don't know anything about the Phong Vu Buffaloes, just know that they play very quick, and it does start with their jungler. If he gets picks like the Jarvan or the Gragas are kind of the big standouts for me, it's his ability to get out to those side lanes and bring Null with him. They are a very early, heavy skirmish team, and it's usually this guy leading the charge, so he needs playmakers. He needs hard engaged champions.
Next up, if we jump to or did you have a point on?
Oh, I was going to throw in, it's actually an interesting matchup because for Team Liquid, Smithy had been a little bit of a problem when they were going on some of their regular season slumps. It was almost always like, oh, the jungle got blown up. And if you're going up against Meliodas, it's not quite the one-on-one killing Smithy in the jungle, like you say, it gets more to other lanes. But you can have a bigger impact in the early game than Smithy. It does happen sometimes, and that's a potential area for him to go.
Yeah, that's actually where I really wanted to focus the matchup. I feel like everyone's going to be talking about Impact versus Zeros, and of course that is going to be a matchup, but it's not just usually the 1v1. It's usually a 2v2, and I think how TL will get Impact through, maybe he can just brute force or survive Zeros, maybe Zeros pops off, but I think it's about Xmithy controlling the enemy jungle, tracking that, and then neutralizing everything for Doublelift and Core JJ to take off.
A quick look at the second series of the day and a couple key players that might sway that matchup. I want to start for Flash Wolves, Rather in the mid lane. Not a recognizable name for the organization of Flash Wolves, as we talked about previously in this segment, but definitely a pivotal player.
He's not known for his flashy laning. He does have a bit of a smaller champion pool, likes to play a lot of push-oriented champions, but he is an excellent team fighter. And when push comes to shove, Flash Wolves can be some of the best team fighters in the world on their day, and it is because of this guy. Now, one of their kind of late game insurance policies, the Hail Mary if they need it, if everything starts collapsing in the early game, is just to be like, okay, Rather, our mid laner, team fight god, just wait for him.
Yeah, and formerly was on Griffin way before they kind of really
Or
blew
Chovy.
up, but, you know, was the predecessor to Chovy for that roster. So he's definitely got some chops on him.
Yeah, super fun fact there. Lastly, Gadget in the bot lane over there for Vega.
I mean, and this guy is such a wild card in the bot lane. His champion pool is unlike anyone else's seemingly right now. He's playing Nico in the bot lane. He's playing Karthus in the bot lane. He's doing all these crazy things, and it's such a weird thing to have to deal with in what feels like a pretty standard meta bot lane.
And you don't often see kind of the mastery over that many bizarre champions. Usually when someone kind of has deep champion pools like this, they're using the edge that you don't know how to play that matchup, and they don't have to have perfect mastery over it, but they can catch you off guard and abuse that. This guy looks so clean on picks like the Heimerdinger, on picks like the Karthus and the Nico. He's very clearly a master of these champions. He's put in the time, and it looks sick to watch.
So the question will be, how does Flash Wolves then respond to the unique picks that he is likely to pull out today? Ahead of game one, though, let's send it over to Riv, who chatted with Kane about the pressure of competing against the home crowd favorites to start MSI.
I had a chance to catch up with TL's coach, Kane, before their match today, and I wanted to ask him what was their main focus after finals. He said two things. One, we want to widen everyone's champion pool, and two, we want to be much more aggressive on the Rift, finding fights everywhere, controlling the lanes, and controlling the game. I also wanted to ask him how they feel finally getting to bring the team international after being so outspoken. He said, it feels great. We are very confident about the matchup, and there's not much pressure internationally. If we play our game, the wins will follow. Back to you.
Confident, citing not much pressure, but also talking about maybe a slight adjustment in play style, saying they'd like to be more aggressive and pick earlier fights, control the map. We'll dive into how that might interact with a team like Fangbu Buffalo, because yeah, as I expected, I see some worried looks on my
You see all the NA guys just like, oh no.
I don't know if that's the right call. After a hard-fought victory against TSM in the LCS Finals, Team Liquid are back on the international stage, looking for more success this time around with some new players.
Yeah, we already hit on Core JJ a lot, but you can't forget about Jensen coming in the mid lane. So many of the problems for Team Liquid have been kind of around Pobelter in their previous two international performances. He's a great North American player, but he does feel like he gets picked apart a little bit, and Jensen is the best, most successful international mid laner that North America has ever had. So you put him on a team with Doublelift and Core JJ, and suddenly this team that dominated now 3 splits in a row in North America feel like they're finally ready to break through on the international stage.
And I feel like Jensen's kind of been running away from some of these quiet whispers about, like, can he handle these high pressure situations? And I feel like putting down a Korean team in Korea and now having the opportunity to clap back at the Vietnamese hometown heroes, I think it's really time for Jensen to put it to bed and say, no, I am an international threat and you will respect me.
He promised Doublelift that he'd carry him out of groups if Doublelift carried him to a domestic title. So, step 1 complete. Step 2 still needs to happen. Their opponents today, though, are the hometown favorites, as was mentioned, Fangbu Buffalo, who will have the crowd backing them up as they try to build on Vietnam's international legacy.
And we do need to take apart that idea of like the 6-man. This is probably going to be very stacked for Fangbu Buffalo. They are a very hyphy team. When it gets going, it gets very bloody. It turns into an all-out brawl. And a lot of times when we do see kind of these more, especially in TL, a more methodical, kind of slower, controlled game, when it starts getting down and dirty, that's when things can go sideways.
Yeah, I mean, this is, kind of the hometown favorite, not just in like, oh, they're in Vietnam, obviously home country, but this is actually their representative a lot of the time. This is the second straight international tournament they've been to. They're kind of the clear-cut best team. They had a pretty tough time in groups, all things considered. They did have to go that tiebreaker game versus Fenerbahce, and that's when you can maybe say, okay, the 6-man really did matter there. The fact that they got that extra energy from their crowd after a really long day where they had to take 4 hours off in the middle to let some of Group B's games happen. So I think that can matter a lot in a long series.
Yeah, and I do think that a lot of people will point to previous meetings between North America and Vietnam. And just in general, when we talk about Vietnam, a lot of people will perhaps remember the Gigabyte Marines and their quick, aggressive, and wild play style. I'm not sure we'll go so far as the 5-minute level 6 Nocturne gank into the bot lane. But as you mentioned, Frost, it is a very fast-paced team, and that's where I want to return to the comments that Riv made around talking to Kane, in that if TL wants to start playing more aggressively, is that actually the right decision into a team like Fangbu Buffalo?
I mean, it feels like just kind of a gut check on, what is that actual gap between our major regions and our emerging regions, because the VCS is climbing up very quickly, because they don't need to rely just on kind of like the cheese, like the level 6 Nocturne at 5 minutes. When you saw it go to EVOS and now to Fangbu Buffalo, they play standard fundamental League of Legends. They just play it very quickly. So Maybe TL can just brute force them because they have more experience competing at like a higher level in a premier region. But if they get gut checked on it and it doesn't work, I think you need to go back to your style. Don't play into Fangbu Buffalo style. Say that you have the experience that you can change the course of the game.
And beyond that, I do want to talk about like positional matchups, or at least focuses for both of these teams. On the side of Team Liquid, we're all, well versed in how they like to play. It's through the bot lane, it's put Doublelift in a position to carry. But as was mentioned, for the majority of the teams in this tournament, top lane is actually the focus.
Yeah, and Zeros is obviously that guy for them. He was super hyped up coming to last year's World. People, kind of see him as the new best player in Vietnam. It is pretty boom or bust in some of the playing games. He, had, I think, 10 deaths at one point, which is very surprising. But when he's on, he is incredible. And like you were saying, Meliodas does a good job of making sure that he is in a good position.
It does feel to me that this is a bit of a split map scenario where we're going to wait towards PVB because they do have a carry top laner like Zeros, but maybe Impact's able to hold him. On the flip side, then, everyone's talking about Doublelift and Core JJ. The guys who are having the best tournament so far are actually Big Koro and Pallet. These guys have had pop-off performances, and I don't think they're just going to fall flat again unless the gap is actually just that big.
Well, so it does look like, or feels like, that there are many different ways that this matchup can swing, just based on who's performing on the day, where the picks fall, and whatnot. So I want to get some win conditions on the board to maybe distill this down into something that we can focus on and point to when we're talking about these teams. Mark, we're going to start with you, Team Liquid, of course.
Pretty simple. Don't bench yourselves. Make sure you get onto the Rift.
If that's all it takes.
No, I'm kidding.
If the 5 players get there.
I think
get to the stage.
The main thing is remain calm and play your game because, like we're saying, you're playing against a team that does play a much faster game. VCS is the fastest region in the world. Yes, Fangbu are not quite as fast as the rest of them, but they're still much faster than most North American teams. We talk about the 6-man, the crowd, the energy, all that kind of stuff. And so stay calm. Don't get sucked into that play style. I know Kane just said they want to be more aggressive, but maybe save that for playing stage.
All right.
Get there first and do that by playing your more reserved style.
All right, fair enough. How does the hometown team take it, Frost?
It's kind of like a coloring book, if you will, like a step-by-step process. First thing, you need playmaking junglers. Meliodas is where everything starts for this team, so make sure that he gets something that has teeth, that can take a bite out of the early game. Then you want to make sure that you have playmakers for Zeros. I want carry. I want stronger 2v2 topside. Try to exploit Impact. We've seen him kind of crumble again and again on the international stage. Maybe you can exploit that. And if all else fails, bring late game insurance policy. Make sure that Big Kuro is on something that scales and try to take a 50-50, 5v5 coin flip.
All right, there you have it. It's all been laid out. So now, where does your faith lie? In which of these teams, who will be the first to move on to the group stages?
This may shock some people, but I will say Team Liquid 3-0.
3-0. So after all of that discussion of where Fangbu Buffalo could find an edge or make a difference, you still think it will be a shutout in favor of the North American squad?
I think so, but it is possible you lose a game. I think Fangbu is very explosive, and that can happen, but I'm going to bet against it.
Do you think it changes? Like, now that you've heard that Team Liquid are going to try to play more aggressive, or suddenly you're like, oh, maybe that's a game?
Maybe, because they have, like we said, they have been playing more carries in the playoffs and these kinds of things. There are
volatile matchups.
Yeah, there's volatile matchups. Meliodas is great, so I think there are the right, components for an upset in a game, but not for a series at all.
All right, Frost, what's your prediction?
I'm also sitting on a 3-0 for TL. But my faith is that they would play it controlled. I just thought that they would have more experience. You have so much international experience stacked onto this roster right now, bringing in a world champion, fixing the mistakes that had previously held them back at MSI. Like, let's not forget, when they were running Ale and Po Belter, they took down RNG.
Right.
Like, that is a very similar team to what Fangbu Buffalo can throw, and I think the pieces are better, so I'm like, I'll have confidence.
So I'm going to ask your same question to you. After hearing Kane's remarks around maybe a slight adjustment to the playstyle, are you concerned, or would you be more willing to adjust that to a 3-1 or say?
I think if Zeros was having a better tournament, not that he's having a bad tournament, it's just not what we expected from like that performance that we know that he can have. This guy really can pop off and can be a threat, but it hasn't shown up in play-ins yet. So maybe he comes into the series and he throws it down, but so far I'm like, you'll probably be able to control that.
Yeah, I think one thing too that we need to discuss, of course, is the fact that we are moving from a group stage setting to the knockout setting. Those best of fives, as we've always talked about, are a very different animal, and so which of these teams will perform better over the elongated stretch?
Well, that plus one team has had games that they've already played. Fangbu is much more warmed up in that sense, where they've already been playing in front of their crowd. They've already played a high pressure game in the tiebreaker game, so they might have a little bit of a faster start out of the gate in game one, where Team Liquid might still be getting used to the Vietnamese area, the crowd, travel and all that stuff.
But on that flip side, you then have so much tape that Team Liquid just got to sit back and watch and prepare for these teams. And that tiebreaker, that was, I'm going to call it, that was a fiesta. That was wild.
It was fun.
All right, well, the stage is set. We're all warmed up and ready to go. We're ready to kick off Champion Select from Ho Chi Minh City as Team Liquid and Phong Vu Buffalo kick things off. That's not quite a line.
Kick things off indeed, Dash. Thank you so much. I'm revved up and ready to get into this first series. You can hear the fans in Ho Chi Minh ready as well. Daniel Drake, of course, joined by an analyst whose name I can definitely say. Don't you worry. I've got it. It's in my brain. I'm going to pronounce it perfectly. It's going to be great, and you'll hear it later. It's going to happen. How you feeling?
I'm feeling good, nameless co-caster.
Good, perfect.
Here to cast some exciting League of Legends.
I realize now you weren't on the screen. I'm with Isaac Azael Cummings Bentley. I almost tripped again. But my struggles with pronouncing your name, not nearly as interesting as what is going to be a very explosive series between two teams. Team Liquid, of course, a lot of pressure on them to just make this a clean sweep, to look good across the board. And for Phong Vu Buffalo in their hometown, yes, it's probably going to improve that performance. Hearing so